Amy Davies wanted desperately to protect her children and maintain family stability, but she knew that staying with her abusive husband was no longer an option.
I didn't want to break up my children's home. And I didn't want to go through a divorce, but I was serious. Like, I had planned for this in my mind. I had been building up to this for a year, and I'd known I'd had to do it for years before. You have no choice but to be strong and move forward. And I made a lot of mistakes, but that's where the journey the new life started.
That's up next on Reinvention at Any Age. How did you end up in this kind of situation? And that changed the whole trajectory of your life. This is my light, and I'm going to let it shine. Even if it's uncomfortable, if the change is for the better, it's worth it. Don't be scared, prepare.
Reinvention is possible. Go make it happen for you today.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Reinvention at Any Age. I'm Amy Sweezy, and I am passionate about helping you navigate through your reinvention. My guest today had what many would call the perfect life. Successful corporate job, first home in the big city, doting husband, 2 amazing kids, and a sweet chocolate lab. From the outside looking in, Amy Davies had it all. But one day, she made a shocking discovery in, of all places, the inside of the oven in her home, and her entire life changed forever. That discovery forced her to reinvent her personal life for her own safety and the safety of her children. Please welcome Amy Davies to the podcast. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Amy. How are ya?
I'm great. It's so great to see you. I want to start with that perfect life that I talked about there. You had been living in London for several years. You moved back to Toronto around the age of 30. You met this amazing man and jumped into a relationship rather quickly. Can you just kind of paint that picture for us? How were you feeling at this stage in your life?
Yeah, I would say that, I had a really amazing time in Europe. I had lived there for 6 years. So as soon as I left university, I packed up and off I went. I lived in the Swiss Alps for a little while. I lived in London, England for many years, got a fantastic job. I worked for Unilever there at their head office. So I was really kind of proud of my career, but things started to feel like it was time to come home. It's a very transient city. And I was getting to the point where I was 29 years old, which is kind of a big age, especially for women, thinking, what am I doing with my life? I started getting a little bit disillusioned with the corporate world. Even though I had a really good, I had a great career, but sometimes it's not what you expect. And that's what happened to me. And so I came back. I didn't have a job. And I should also say the London bombings happened right around that time too. And so that was quite a shock to the system. It just made you feel like, oh my gosh, I have that homing device on and I just want to go home. So I moved back to Toronto. I set up for myself, but I was coming back to a world that had, of course, moved on without me. And, a lot of the people in my life were ticking all those boxes. And I think as I was reflecting on this story, because I knew I was talking to you today, Amy, I was thinking about all the boxes that I was trying to tick, get your university education. I wanted to travel, so that was big for me. So I ticked that box. I wanted to come home. Then I wanted to get married, get a house, have kids, all of the things. I just wanted to be like everybody else, right? And I don't think that's the right thing, by the way, as I learned the hard way. And so I came back 29 years old, get off the plane. I say off the plane and into his arms, basically. So I was very vulnerable at that time. I didn't have a job yet in Canada. I had to live at home for a few months. And then I met someone who seemed to want all the same things that I did and was saying all the right things and wanted to move quickly, which to me was important because I felt that biological clock ticking and I really did want to have children. So I guess that was the situation. It was just a rare period of vulnerability after one of the most exciting, exhilarating, and successful periods of my life to that point.
So at what point then did you realize that this wasn't the person or the relationship that everybody else thought it was?
Well, the sad thing is, and if anyone is listening to me and they've either been in this situation or they are in this situation, for me, I learned pretty early on. And that's, I think, one of the saddest things. I think that I was a bit emotionally detached from the relationship. Right off the bat, I just left all of my very close friends in England that I had for 6 years. Like, I built really strong relationships with people that I'm still friends with today, despite the distance. So I noticed early on there were warning signs. Now I know so much more about the warning signs, and wow, I was living in red flag city. And I hadn't picked up on it because part of me didn't want to, right? Part of me didn't
Mhm.
want to. I had something I thought was stable and secure, and I was going to go for it because I wanted all of those things and I didn't want to be that person who was being left behind in life. But I did start seeing some early warning signs where he lost his job. He became very obsessed with his previous employers and really kind of stalked them actually. Now that, later on when you reflect on these things, it makes so much more sense. And the way he treated me was really amazing for a while. He did the love bombing thing. The I love yous came flowing out really easily for him very early on. And now I know that moving in with someone quickly, saying I love you really quickly, those are red flags. However, he did really start treating me poorly within that first year once he could see that he had me. He had my mark. Like, I was a very sensitive, compassionate, empathetic person who was always working to better the relationship. So he had my number. Yeah. He was looking for someone just like me.
And, I hear you talk about it now. Obviously, you're so far removed. You've even been able to laugh a little bit as you share about the red flags, but
Yeah.
obviously you've come a long way through all of this. But there's a lot of women who are probably listening today who maybe are in a situation like this right now. And they're like, wait a second, I can't laugh about this. This is,
Yeah.
I feel stuck. They're scared, maybe for
Yeah.
themselves and their children. So, how was it initially that you were able to break free? I mean, obviously, this must have been quite a process.
Well, I knew that I had to leave for quite some time. And listen, I really recognize I came to this from a place of privilege. And by that, I mean there were less barriers in my way than there are for other people. So if people are listening and they don't feel that they can do what I did, that makes absolute sense to me. And privilege are things like having an access to an education, which I was gifted to me by my parents, right? So I was very privileged that way. I had a great career when I left. And I was financially independent. So that was something that really helped me as well. But some of the things I did to prepare, what people can do to prepare is, I know it's hard because you feel like you're betraying the other person, but starting to do some research into your legal rights. My situation, we were not technically married. We were common law. There's different laws when it comes to common law, especially when it comes to finances. Obviously, if you have kids, the most important thing is your kids and the safety of your children. One of the things that I did a year before, I was not strong. I was weak. I was weak emotionally and I was weak physically. And I hadn't always been that way, but I had become that way in this relationship. And I was really beaten down, right? Like, if you have someone who's kind of tormenting you and looking for ways to make you feel bad about yourself, like a bad professional that was really important to me, and a bad mother, you start partly to believe that. So one of the things that I did is I started going to the gym all the time, and I really went on this fitness plan like a year before I left. I was saying to myself, Amy, you need to be physically strong for this, and have your energy to help yourself and your kids, because I knew, looking at him and his behavior, I was like, you're going to make this really hard for me. I had no idea how hard. And I really had no idea what I was in at the time. It took me a long time getting out of that relationship to realize that I had been in an abusive relationship pretty much from day one. And it was a shock to me when I figured it out, which is surprising because I hope, like, people don't see me as being a naive person or someone who's unintelligent, but I was fooled. I was totally duped in this relationship for sure.
Yeah, and I think for women especially, that appearance is so important. We're so nervous about what other people think, and so we put off making important decisions even when it's our safety that's involved because we're too scared what everybody's gonna think.
Absolutely. And Amy, one of the things that has always stood out for me in all of this is that I was the primary breadwinner in the house, and that was by design. He withheld a lot of money and didn't really work all that much. And one of the things that just drives me crazy when I think about it today is I would commute into work about an hour and a half with our daughter, our toddler, well, baby to start and then toddler. And I would get home and he didn't work a lot, right? And I would get home and he would look at me after I got off, taking a train, taking a streetcar, taking like all kinds of transit, walking with our daughter. And it would be 6:30, 7 o'clock, and he'd look at me and say, "What's for dinner?"
Ugh.
It just makes my blood boil to this day, and I just know there are other women in this situation, and I do not consider that a laughing matter. It's like I laugh because it hurts. It's really sad and hard, but when we got to the point where we had purchased our home, we lived in a great neighborhood in the city, I would have other women chase me down on the few days I had the opportunity to drop my kids off because don't forget, I had to work. We had a huge mortgage, and I was the one making the income for the family. So I got dressed up in my Sunday best every morning, Monday to Friday, and I was out the door and off to work. And I had to travel as well. But I would have women who would chase me down that I barely knew. They knew him because he was present. He was always around, right? He had the flexibility and the time that I had created. Our kids were both in before and after school care and daycare. So it's not like he was a stay at home dad or anything. But they would say to me, "Oh my goodness, you are so lucky to have
Mhm.
such a wonderful husband. He just takes such great care of those kids." And I'm like, he doesn't clip their fingernails and he doesn't know the last time their sheets were changed. Like he might walk them to school every morning, but I've given that gift to him.
So eventually you split up and you leave him. What happened after that? Did he just kind of accept your decision and say, "Okay, time to move on"?
Well, on the surface, when we first had the conversation, it really climaxed from a very dangerous situation. He always had issues with road rage. And when we were on the way to his family's cottage, in the car, he started a fight with two men in a pickup truck with our young children, like in their car seats in the back. And I was apoplectic. I was terrified. And I took his phone, like he was trying, I can't remember all of the details of it, but it was traumatic for sure. And I was so shaken, I could barely speak all weekend long. And I was in front of his family, and I just knew that it was over. There was no way. I'm not putting my children in harm's way anymore. And I could see, especially my daughter was emotionally reacting to things that in ways that I did not consider healthy. And I just get goosebumps even thinking about it now. And this was not unnatural for him to put us in these dangerous situations. By the way, he liked to see me suffer. He liked to see me feel that our children were at risk. And it was his way, I think, of punishing me for my success. He didn't like that even though he benefited from it, he didn't like it. So I got my act together. I made a lot of mistakes before this, Amy, and I want to admit that one of the things that I did that really pushed me over the edge, because sometimes people tell these stories in retrospect and they seem like they handled everything perfectly. I didn't. One of the things I want to share, it's really embarrassing, but I went to a work function that same week and I was away and I drank too much and I embarrassed myself. Like it wasn't as terrible as it could have been, but I humiliated myself. And I was like, this is harming my children, is harming me. I cannot live under these conditions anymore. And then I had the conversation with him and he reacted like okay at first. I don't think he thought I was really going to do it because he knew that the appearances were important to me.
Mhm.
And like so many of us, I didn't want to break up my children's home. And I didn't want to go through a divorce, but I was serious. Like I had planned for this in my mind. I had been building up to this for a year, and I'd known I'd had to do it for years before.
Well, I know at one point you were attempting this nesting arrangement. So it seems like you were still really trying to be the bigger person despite how you'd been treated and still even at this point not realizing that it was an abusive relationship.
Right. In the background, I was being text constantly. I was being emailed in the middle of the night by him, even though he was in the same house in a different room. Like very creepy emails, like "A Little Birdie Told Me" was the title of one of the emails. And it was just like so scary. And he started telling me that I had a phantom stalker who was communicating with him through social media platforms, giving them a play by play on what I was doing and who I was seeing. And I wasn't seeing anyone, but he had built this whole narrative up. And
Yeah.
I was so naive, Amy. I had my password to my phone was 0000, right? Because we had to have a password for work. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even had a password on my phone. And I just couldn't believe, your reality is so warped when you're going through these things. You're tired. You don't forget, I had really young kids on top of everything else. And so he had to move out because he was talking about if me being found dead in a gutter. And I had to, I got my lawyer involved, and finally he was refusing to move out of the house. And it's his house too, so he should, and they're his kids too. I wasn't trying to keep anything from him. So we agreed eventually to this nesting arrangement where I would live on and off. And so that's how that happened. Because people have legal rights. And that's why I
Mhm.
think it's always important for people in situations like these to talk to a lawyer, because it really, there's not a lot someone can do to keep them away from you and the kids if you have kids. So you have to understand how to handle it in the best way possible. And it's going to escalate. And in my case, it certainly did.
At the beginning of the podcast, I referenced that you found something in the oven inside your house.
Yes.
And it was during this time that you found this hidden thing that changed everything. Can you talk a little bit like what was that?
Yeah, I know. Everyone's like, "What was in the oven?" So I came home one day. I had been the parent who was outside of the home for a few days, and I came home, got my kids from after school care, brought them home, and I was starting to. I turned on the oven to get ready for our dinner, and I found a bag filled with external hard drives. And something in me just said, "This is not good, Amy. Like, it's really not good." First of all, like, what is this doing in the oven? The
Right.
strangest place. And then I thought, there is something in these hard drives. And if I do not get out of this house right now, I feel like if he realizes he's forgotten these, what won't he do to get them back? So even though I didn't recognize that I was in an abusive relationship, I was still wanted some level of normalcy. And I was, but when those moments happen, you're like, the risk is so great that I called my parents, who were amazing. And I said, please, they didn't live far away. I said, please just drop everything. You need to come to the house. I have to pack up as much as I can as quickly as possible and get out of the house. Something is wrong. And so I packed up everything and we went to their house, and sure enough, I was right. Those hard drives were filled with some extremely um, shocking information. One file in particular was all about me, and it turned out I did not have a phantom stalker. I was living with my stalker. He had been following me for months and months. Like he had a there was evidence that he had a private investigator following me, all of my texts, all of my emails, pictures of me sleeping, pictures of things like my undergarments laid out on our bed. I won't mention it all, but other very disturbing things he was doing with my belongings, and pictures of all of my identification. It was terrifying to the level, and I remember when I did call the police, they're just like, "Can't believe how much content there was." And one of the things that people asked me after this which I want to make sure that I'm mentioning, because if anyone's listening and they're in this situation, people would say, "Oh, did this happen before or after you split up? Like, was he following you?" No one has the right to track you, whether you're married to them or not. No one should
Mhm.
be having private investigators following you or track. He had an app on my phone I didn't know about. So take your devices to an expert and make sure that you're not being tracked. The police recommended I check my car to see if there was a tracker on my car. There wasn't, but that can happen to people. But it's not right. When you're in a marriage, the person is not entitled to track you and read your private messages and break into your phone without your permission. So that is never right. And I just wanted to mention that. Every relationship is different, but in my opinion, that is just you shouldn't be asking someone if it happened before or after the breakup. That it happened anytime is a problem. So that kind of started the ball rolling on the police involvement in our case. And the volume of messages he was sending me, Amy, and I was always asking him, "Please stop. Please only contact me about things about the kids." He was accusing me of all kinds of affairs and all kinds, like, it just never stopped. It was like having a constant conversation with someone. Like, I wasn't participating in the conversation, but it was messages that were one message was so long that I had to push a I've never seen this before and I've never seen it since, but I pushed an arrow on it and just the text message was about 3 or 4 Word doc pages worth of message. Yeah.
Wow.
So I ended up printing off I screenshotted everything, save everything if you're in this situation. And then I had to print it all, go take it to a local printer and get it all printed off. It was 600 pages worth of messages, primarily from him to me over a 3-month period.
This is so scary and disturbing when it's a stranger, but this was your
Yeah.
partner. This was the father of your children.
Yes. Yes. It was a huge issue, the fact that he had access to our children, and there was almost nothing I could do to prevent him from seeing our kids. Now, once this all came to light, and that now and people talk about it, we have to be careful of the language they use, because he tried to use this language a lot, like, "She had me arrested." You can't have someone arrested. You share the evidence with the police, they do an investigation, and they make the decision as to whether they're gonna take action. The other thing I didn't know that's really important to know is repeated communication is harassment. So repeated unwanted communication is actually criminal harassment, but you have to be able to demonstrate that you haven't engaged them in conversation. You have just continually said, like a broken record, "Please stop. Please don't talk to me about anything about except our kids." However, at that point, once I went to the police with this mountain of evidence, there was a warrant out for his arrest, and it took a few days. So we kind of had to go into hiding during those few days. I couldn't put the kids in school. I know that his daycare did a lockdown because they were they were afraid he was going to come onto the premises, and they were afraid of what he might do. And yeah, so that was the moment where everything, I mean, it was falling apart, let's face it. I didn't realize it, but that was the
Yeah.
moment that it was like rock bottom. I don't know what to do. And on top of which, my basement flooded.
Oh,
My toilet backed up. Of course, it always happens, right?
right. When it rains, it pours, literally.
Exactly.
Uh,
So,
so
yes.
he
So
was arrested. Was there a trial? Did he go to jail?
he went to jail for a few days. But if anyone's listening to this and they've ever been the victim of a crime, it just, like, justice takes a very long time, and it's absolutely not the journey you would expect based on what you've seen in the movies. You think, like, a man is stalking is considered an act of violence. An abusive man commits an act of violence against their wife. They can't see their wife or the children. That is just not the case. There was a restraining order to protect me and the kids for about 3 months. But I had to keep going back to family court to keep things, as they should be, in my opinion, because he was escalating to the point where actually in court, the judge said that a reasonable person would imagine this man would abscond with his children or worse. Um, And so that was terrifying, and she maintained the protective order for the children. And my protective order was already in place. But it took years and years to work all of this out. And so, thinking about a reinvention, definitely had to reinvent my life. And you're not starting from scratch. You're starting with two really important people in your life who need you. And so you have no choice but to be strong and move forward. And I made a lot of mistakes, but that's where the journey the new life started. The one great thing was that I didn't have to talk to him ever. I mean, I have since, but, and I was able to protect my children. They now see him.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't, that's what I mean. It only lasted for about 6 months to a year that he had supervised access. And so then over years, the courts they want children seeing both of their parents. And at the time, things are now changing, thankfully, but a danger to the mother is not considered a danger to the children in the eyes of the law.
And you're going public with this story, so I assume that, it's not like it's anonymous. People know who he was. He's your children's dad. Do you have any fear of that? Are there any repercussions of you coming out with this story now?
I think there's more of a danger of women not coming forward with their stories. I've waited for over a decade. This is the first time I've ever spoken about this. Yeah, could there be? I have a Doberman now. That's not by accident. I love him, but he serves a purpose for me in my life. I don't have a routine. That is also by design. I'm not a person of routine. I should say that too, but it has helped me because routine can be dangerous if you're in a dangerous situation like this. I have a wonderful husband who you've met now. He's a big guy and he's amazing. But I think the most dangerous time is right immediately afterwards. For me, in my case, is exceptional because even until a month ago, he was just constantly messaging me through an app. That the only app he's allowed to use. There's special apps for people in acrimonious relationships, and he could only message me through that. And a month ago, I had to cut off all communication there because he's still, years later, will not stop telling me what a terrible person and parent I am. And it's like it's just a constant dialogue. And there's no reason he doesn't have custody of the kids. He has some access, but we're not co-parenting at this point. It was set up for us to schedule, but a lot of men use, and I'm saying men because it's so often men, I don't want to discount people who are having the opposite situation. So I'm going to say it this way, but there are a lot of men who just use these tools as a way to continue their abuse.
You mentioned your parents a couple of times and that they came and rescued you.
Yes.
Did you have a lot of support from family and friends during this time?
I've talked very openly about the support I had from my employer, which was phenomenal. I worked for Wrigley and the Wrigley Mars organization, and I want to give them a huge shout out because they were incredible. I wrote, if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I wrote a post recently, but one more so a year ago that got a lot of attention where I talked about the steps they took to protect me. My parents have been amazing, just supportive in every way. And some of my extended family. However, some of my closer family and people in my community actually supported him. Even after his arrests, yes. Even after his arrests, even seeing some of the documentation, some people just want to dislike you, Amy. I've noticed that in life. You're the same. You're a strong, successful woman. And there are certain types of people that just don't want to like strong, successful women. And I think it says more about them than it does about us. But at the time, oh my gosh, Amy, it almost killed me. It almost killed me. They helped him track me. They wrote affidavits for court, barely knowing me. These are some of the moms at school and dads who would drop off their kids as well and see him. They barely knew me, and they would say that I was a backseat mom. And that like he did all the cleaning, and I'm like, how would you know what goes on in my house? But it did. scare me. It scared me more that he was supported by people I thought were reasonable people than he scared me, because I know who he is. There's a really good book called Without Conscience by Dr. Hare that I think would help people to read who are in the situation, and also Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear. So I know who he is, and that's okay. I've learned to deal with that. But I just cannot to this day believe that some of my family members and even a couple friends, they weren't super close, but they were friends in the community, really went above and beyond, like his minions. They, to this day, I think they still support him.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell 20-something you?
Well, two things. I would say, Amy, you do not have to tick all those boxes. It's okay. So people, like, if you want to have kids, spend a lot of time with kids and understand what parenting is before you do it, because it might not be what you expect. You're going to love your children, of course, but is it something that you have to do? Your body's telling you to do it, but go into it as logically as possible, and do not so ticking the boxes, whether they be career boxes, like there's so many ways to live life, and you do need to make money, so that comes with it. You have to make money, but it doesn't mean you have to tick boxes. You can still do things you enjoy that make you money. So that would be number one. Number two, don't stop being so easily charmed, Amy. Like, sometimes when I feel like I am building a really strong rapport with someone that I barely know, and I feel overly comfortable with them, I do not lean into that feeling. I actually take a step back and try to look and say, whoa, put the brakes on here, Amy. When it comes to running a business, there are vultures circling you who, if they see that you're going to be successful, they will. It's crazy. And it happened to me quite a few times. But because I had read those books, I put up that wall. I'm like, I am not leaning into this good feeling. I am stepping very far back from it. But I think for people in romantic relationships, it's easy to fall in love. It's so easy. It's not easy to get out of a terrible relationship, though, especially once children and assets are in the picture.
And I know it was a process. Obviously, it's not just an
Yes.
overnight thing, but eventually you were able to reinvent your personal life. You got your children into a safe environment. Did that experience help you feel more empowered to reinvent yourself in other ways?
It made it a lot more important for me, because I'm like, I want to do this. Like, I want to, I really have goals professionally, and I want to see myself achieve those goals. Like you, Amy, one of those goals was to write a book, and I've written a book and I feel amazing about it. And I want it to be a good book. And I think it's a really good book. So I was happy about that. And I want to be an entrepreneur. And so I need to take steps to get there. It wasn't going to happen overnight, because I had to pay bills and I needed to keep my job. And I did that, and I did it really well, because I take a lot of pride in the work that I do. And then I launched wrote my book and launched my business. And I'm so glad that I did.
Well, I have read your book and it is fantastic. It was so
Oh, thank
important
you.
for me at a pivotal time in my life
Aw.
personally. So I'm wondering, would you be willing to just stick around and chat a little bit more so that we can maybe do a second episode? Because I would
Sure.
love to hear about how you reinvented yourself professionally as well.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I will stick around.
All right. So, listeners, be sure you stick around. We are going to hear more about Amy's journey moving from a corporate career to that risky and challenging startup. We'll hear more about her book as well. So, in the meantime, Amy, if people want to know more about you, where can they follow you or find you?
The very best place is on LinkedIn. So you can find me there. If you're not on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, but I'm not as popular on Instagram. I've just started a podcast called Your New Business Big Sister. So if you look up New Biz Big Sis, anywhere, you should find me. And over time, you'll see more of me on there.
And of course, I should mention too that we are going to put some specific resources both for people who live in Canada, which is where you live, and in the US, which is where I live. Because if people are victims of domestic abuse or stalking, we want to make sure that they have those resources. So we're going to put those in the show notes and make sure you have them as you're listening to this podcast. Well, I know your story of reinvention will inspire, encourage, and give hope to so many others. So thank you so much for hanging out with us just a little bit longer. We're going to get to part 2 coming up here shortly. So, what about you? Could you relate to Amy's story? Are you in a dangerous situation? Have you experienced trauma? Do you feel trapped and like there's no way out and no one who would understand? Are you protecting someone at the detriment of your own protection and safety? There is help available. The National Victim Connect hotline in the US is 1-855-4-VICTIM. That's 1-855, the number 4, VICTIM. Or you can reach the National Domestic Violence Hotline, also in the US, at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. Whether you want to reinvent yourself or you have to reinvent yourself, remember, reinvention is possible. Take the steps to make it happen for you today.